Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for this special Rural Housing Week webinar, which we're hosting with the Rural Housing Alliance. I'm Sarah Finnegan, Head of Member Relations at the National Housing Federation, and I'm going to be chairing today's event. Before we get started, I've got a few housekeeping comments. So this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website next week. There are a number of ways you can engage with the webinar today, so please use the chat tool to speak to each other. Just check it's set to panelists and attendees. We'll take as many questions as we can, so please you'll submit your questions throughout the session. You can do that using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote and comment on others' questions. We're hosting today's webinar as part of Rural Housing Week, which this year is all about the commitment of rural housing associations to their local communities. I'm joined by the Chief Exec of 3 rural housing associations who are all members of the Rural Housing Alliance, a group of housing associations who have pledged to work with and for rural communities. Our first speaker today is Ursula Benyon, Chief Executive of Trent and Dove and Chair of the Rural Housing Alliance. Ursula's going to tell you more about that pledge and a new guide that the Rural Housing Alliance have written to support their work with local parish councils. Our next 2 speakers are Gail Teasdale, Chief Executive of Broadacres Housing Association, and Martin Collett, Chief Executive of English Rural Housing Association, who will share how they are delivering against that pledge in the areas they work in. We've got a tight agenda, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ursula.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As Sarah said, I'm Ursula Benyon, Chief Executive of Trent and Dove Housing Association, based in East Staffordshire. So we've got the towns of Burton-on-Trent and Uttoxeter, but really the rest of our area is very, very rural and probably topical today. I just talked to the speakers before. So for any of you that are football fans, I know there's an important game on tonight, but if you've seen the England team practice, St George's Park is literally 4 miles just outside of Burton-on-Trent. So very rural, very leafy and in a very nice area. But yeah, I'm here today as chair of the Rural Housing Alliance. Just want to talk about 2 things before I hand over to Gail and Martin. The first one is just to talk to you about our Parish Councillors Guide to Rural Affordable Housing. And this has gone through a relaunch and a refresh. We've taken a long time to go through this. I would head you towards the ruralhousingalliance.net website. The full guide there is downloadable. And it really takes a parish council right from inception through to completion. We talk about all different types of rural affordable housing, but particularly focusing on rural exception sites. Next slide, please. I've just pulled this one up, probably not as a name drop or anything like this, but one of the things I was just reflecting on is the Princess Royal has been a real supporter of affordable rural housing for a long time. And for my sins, I tried to work it out just before this webinar, but I've been doing rural affordable housing for over 30 years now, and I work for the Rural Housing Trust. And even at that period, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, was really interested in rural affordable housing. So I'm really grateful that she's provided the forward to the guide, and apologies, it's small script and I would push you towards the website to look at it. But really, she's saying how vital it is to get affordable housing in rural communities to make sure that they are vibrant and thriving communities. Thank you. Next slide. So today, really, we are looking at the pledge. So the Rural Housing Alliance, a group of like-minded housing associations. And basically we revisited our pledge. This has been going probably for about 4 or 5 years now. Revisited it probably about 5 months ago now. And again, I'm not going to go through what we've got on there, but basically our pledge is to ensure that there are high quality, low carbon, affordable homes with great services in rural areas. And what will that achieve? So delivering our pledge will create and maintain positive local rural communities as real places to live and thrive in. And we really do live by that. And I'm really pleased today to say that I've got 2 people with a lot of rural experience, Gail from Broadacres and Martin from English Rural. We purposely have chosen 2 associations, one from the south and southeast and one from the north. I suspect there'll be some crossover themes, but I also suspect there'll be some kind of unique perspectives from both of them. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Gail. Welcome.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Ursula. So yes, I'm Gail Teasdale. I'm from Broadacres. For anyone who doesn't know us, We've got 6,500 homes based all across North Yorkshire, so market towns and villages. Our football claim to fame, if we're going to do football claims to fame, is that the England manager lives only about 10 miles from where I am at this moment in time. So I thought I'd talk to you about the pledge. So the pledge is to ensure there are high quality, low carbon homes with great services in rural areas. We signed up to that pledge in 2018. Not a difficult decision for an organisation such as us. But what does it mean to Broadacres? And I think for me, one of the main things it means is that it informed our corporate strategy, which is based around the themes of great homes, great customer experience, and great places. So today I thought I'd just do 3 quick case studies that tie into the pledge, because I could talk all afternoon about what we do, because I'm really passionate about it. So the first case study I thought was about developing new homes. Always topical, always difficult. We're just about to take ownership of a 17-home development in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. So to give you a bit of context in the National Park, and in effect across the whole of North Yorkshire, average salaries in North Yorkshire are some of the lowest in the north of England, which always comes as a surprise to people, because whenever they visit, they see the chocolate box loveliness, and then you say, actually, people get paid less on average in this part than they do in, say, Leeds or further up in the northeast. And combined with that, with average house prices, which are some of the very highest in the whole of the north of England, and you get what is usually called the affordability index, but I prefer to call it the unaffordability index, of which is equivalent to some of the leafiest parts of the home counties. So anytime we get some new homes in these areas, it's great. What we've got is a mix of 9 outright sale, 6 discounted market sale, and 2 social rent. That mix isn't great. I would prefer if it was the other way around, but even with that mix, this scheme is not truly financially viable on its own, and we've had to put money in over and above what we would normally do in a scheme. Why is that? Some of the challenges of the price of land, building costs, planning regulations, so the standard and the design of these homes, lovely stone walls round about them, very strong construction, as you would imagine, that to fit in with the vernacular. And the builder that we're working with said it was really important to him that all the homes stood up and they weren't distinguishable, because he was selling outright sale and he didn't want lesser type homes next to his. And frankly, that makes my heart sing, because I went on site the other day and you honestly wouldn't pick out any difference. This scheme has been 12 years in the making. And again, people always find that astonishing, but you know, various challenges along the way. And one of the big challenges which often face in rural development is that complex partnership. So in order to get this together, we have been working with a small builder. We've been working with the National Park. We've been working with the District Council, and we've been working with Homes England. And the funding arrangement is even more complex, because we've got money from Homes England. The builder got money on the Small Builders Fund, and the District Council has stepped in and put some more money in themselves. So the outcome's amazing. As I say, the quality is fantastic. We showed them off to the Chancellor the other week. They've all been sold off plan or let off plan, which again is great. No great surprise there in the current climate. But it's really interesting who they've been sold to. All the outright sale has gone to the grey pound. Not one person who's buying those homes is going to work in the area. Whereas all the discounted market sale and the social rent, every single one of those is somebody who is living and working in the area. And that's where we push the point whenever we meet our politicians around the importance of affordable rural housing, because actually it's the economic driver to the area. And then if I'm sat in the audience of one of these, I always want to know, is there any lessons to learn? And I think it's about building partnerships. I don't know of one rural exception scheme or one small development that hasn't been the coming together of lots of people, more than just a landowner and an RP. It's about longevity. We've got some more developments happening next year, and again, they were a long time in the making. So probably my last sort of reflection would be tenacity. Don't give up. So that's about building new homes. So the second little case study I thought I'd talk about is that low carbon homes. We have been fitting air source heat pumps for coming up to 10 years. We might almost be getting to the point of a replacement program. We've been having those conversations about when you replace these now. 541 of our homes and climbing have an air source heat pump. And by the end of this year, 1 in 9 of our homes will have an air source heat pump. Why? Unsurprisingly, I will not be telling you something you don't already know. 30% of our homes are off gas, and 23% of our homes could never be connected to the gas network. So they're currently operating with LPG, scarily expensive, oil. Last year had a dip, but is fast. The prices are fast increasing, and storage heaters. Storage heaters is flaky, old-fashioned technology, and many of our customers will say to us, they're fine, but if you go out to work, they heat up overnight, and then by the time you get back from work, the house has gone cold. And many of our customers stressed me when I talked to them that they get scared of winter. It's cold. They're scared of the bills. And many will say, I go to bed really early in the evening to avoid being cold. And that, as an organisation, is not something that we can sustain. So we've had a very active programme around air source heat pumps. But one of the things I would always say is an air source heat programme is not just about the heating system. And I'll come on to that. So some of the challenges are, it might be low carbon, and that's what the pledge is about, but it also has to be affordable. And as one of my wise customers said to me when we talked about changing his boiler, he said, Gail, the boiler's not knackered. It's hardly used because at the moment all the heat goes straight out the walls. I'd rather you insulated my walls. And that's what I mean about having a holistic program. So one of the things we have to do when we fit an air source heat pump is we look at the insulation standards of the home, and we have a thermal render program, we have an internal insulation program, we have a massive loft insulation program. But we also frequently have to do a full electric upgrade. And that's because air source heat pumps need modern electric systems, and possibly a rewire is needed. Second or third challenge that I've got written down here is sourcing the air source heat pumps. There are moments it can feel like you're at the end of the production line with the van, just waiting for the air source heat pump to come to the end of the production line, ship it off in the van and drive it to our latest installation. We keep pushing for more production capacity. Aligned with that is skills shortages, getting people to fit these boilers, and we've trained up some of our own, and we've got some apprentices starting this year. But it is a really interesting dilemma for the whole of the UK. I was speaking to a gas engineer in his 40s, and he said, well, Gail, we'll still be fitting gas boilers for the next 10 years. So that takes me to my early 50s. The ones that we've just fitted will be breaking down for a good, next 10 years. So that takes me to my early 60s. I ain't going to bother learning. So if somebody in their early 40s isn't going to learn this skill set, then you are only really speaking to people in their 20s and 30s. And this is an apprenticeship that might take you 4 years. From a customer's point of view, there's the cost of the electricity. I was very pleased to read late last week that they're talking about attaching more of the electricity cost, taking that off the electricity sort of price per unit and adding it to gas. And that would make much more sense, because at the moment you're making gas appear efficient and cheap compared to electric usage. The next thing is tenants accepting a new heating source. Our tenancies are long, we're in a rural area. There isn't a lot of choice. People don't move. They have tenancies that last 20, 30 years. So marching into somebody's home and saying, we're going to rip out your heating system, we're going to rewire, and we're going to give you one of these new techie things, air source heat pumps. that's a lot to take in. And when many people think, well, actually, I've got a solid fuel system and my neighbour drops off bits of trees and pallets and stuff like that, and that's kind of free, so why would I go and adopt this new technology? So there's an awful lot of conversations with customers. But the positives, they do set us up for the future. Everyone that we fit is a step in the right direction for carbon neutrality, and customer satisfaction is generally very high. I would say, coming on again to lessons learned, that customer satisfaction comes back to, we have 2 people who do nothing but work with customers. They are our customer liaison officers, and they are before, during and after installation, and they are worth their weight in gold. And I would say anybody who's approaching fitting air source heat pumps, or indeed any other new heating system, that's the thing you need to invest the money in. Don't treat it as a purely an asset installation. This is about working with customers to explain how the new system works. Other things, just in case there's somebody techie in the audience, and I can feel like I know this sort of stuff, we've overspec'd the piping. So when it says 22 mil is okay, we fit 28 mil. We've got a very detailed spec around flushing systems before you switch them on. Sounds like nothing, but it's amazing what that's done to the success rate of the air source heat pumps. And one of the things, talking about customers embracing this technology, has meant that we're doing an awful lot of our air source heat pumps in voids, just because of the disruption to properties. And that's been something for the board to take on board, as it were. It has meant that our void times are longer, but it's worth it in the end. But then taking on that rural aspect, planning permission, start your planning applications early. I always struggle with the fact that you might need a planning permission to fit an air source heat pump, but in rural areas, particularly national parks, you do. So that's the low carbon bit of the rural pledge. So I thought I'd finish with my third case study, which is around services. And again, I suppose it comes back to that rural chocolate box. It all looks lovely. But really, just because you live in a rural environment doesn't mean that you might not need some support every now and again. And something that I'm particularly proud of is our mental health accommodation. So this is accommodation in a market town, literally just outside one of the national parks. It has 5 self-contained flats, and it is regularly visited by our colleagues. The flats themselves, the idea is that you go to live in them for 1 to 2 years, and it enables you to learn some life skills, get your life back in order, and then you can move on. And to give some context, the nearest mental health support from a hospital base is 40 miles away, with a complex public transport network to get there. So really, really difficult. The challenges, let's start with the challenges of that. Working in a small area can be difficult. Everybody knows about the place. So stigma can be there. And really the move on element is really difficult, because we haven't got a huge number of rural affordable rents. You know, I want more. So sometimes when people move on, they've got to get private lets, and then they're faced with finding the bond, etc. So those are the challenges. But the positives for me is that's accommodation in the local community that the local community really know about. And, you know, there are occasions where people have a bit of a wobble, and you know what, the local community steps in. They know who to phone at Broadacres, and they say, I think Joe at number 3 is just struggling, and we can get out there. And that for me is just the epitome. In a big city, you get lost and you're invisible. In a local community like that, you're not. So I could talk for ages about all the local successful move-ons that we've had, but for me, that lodge is amazing, and it's just as important as supplying new homes. So that was a whistle-stop tour through 3 quick case studies about how we try and meet the rural pledge. Now I'm going to hand over to Martin, who'll probably outdo me several times over.
I doubt it very much, Gail, but thank you anyway. So for those that don't know me or English Rural, I'm Martin Collett. I'm the Chief Executive of English Rural Housing Association. We are a smallish housing association operating across the south of England, with around 1,250 homes, all in small rural communities, and all developed in partnership with those communities as well. So Becca is kindly helping me out with my slides, which I'm very grateful for, because there are a few media clips in there as well. So if it goes wrong, I won't panic, she will. So if we move to the first slide, please, Becca. So the first slide I wanted to talk about is around the development we built in Glebe Meadow, Roxwell in Essex. And you would have seen earlier on in Ursula's slide the pledge that the Rural Housing Alliance members commit to. And what I'm going to be doing through the case studies I'm talking about is just pulling out a few of those pledge commitments and to highlight how here at English Rural we try and achieve those as well. So this one in particular is looking at ensuring that homes are occupied by people who have a local connection or contribute to the sustainability and inclusivity of the village and rural area. So I'm going to talk about Roxwell to show you how we've achieved that. But before I sort of go into the detail of how we achieved that, just to give a bit of an overview of the development itself. So the development at Roxwell is pretty sort of standard for English Rural. Our average development size is around sort of 6 or 7 units. At Roxwell, we built 7 homes, and we did that via the Rural Exception Site policy. The difference here at Roxwell is that there are 5 affordable rented homes and also 2 discounted local sale homes. And I'm going to pick up on those latter 2 in a moment, just to explain how we handled those and what they are. But with the affordable homes, there's a 1 3-bed, 2 2-beds and 2 1-bed units. And whenever we're looking to build these sites, we always look what the local needs are as well. What do the community need in order to support and provide homes for those that need them in that community. And that's important when we build the affordable, but also when we are doing sort of non-affordable, so discounted local sale or even some market cross subsidy, we also try to think about what the needs of that community are. And the 2 discounted market sale units here at Roxwell were 2 3-bed chalet type homes. And one of the things we did notice when we were working with the community to see what the local needs were that there were a lot of older households, owner occupiers living in unsuitable accommodation who wanted to remain in the village but couldn't find something smaller to move to. So the concept behind these 2 discounted sale units was that actually that will provide those individuals an opportunity to remain in the village as well in a home that's more suitable for their needs. With all of the developments that we build, there's always a partnership, and Gail mentioned this, that partnership is really essential. So in this case, it's a partnership between Roxwell Parish Council, who were our sort of eyes and ears and sort of feet on the ground, and whose idea it was to progress this development in the first instance. We were invited in to work with them. And also Chelmsford City Council, so the local authority, Essex Rural Community Council, and of course ourselves. Just picking up on Essex Rural Community Council, we mentioned them because they employ the Rural Housing Enabler, and I think Laura is actually watching this because I noticed her name on the list. So hello, Laura. This wouldn't have happened without your help. As well. But the role of the Rural Housing Enabler is critical. That independent broker that will work with the community, that will do that hand-holding and would help to progress developments to fruition. There aren't enough of them. They're not well funded, so we need to do more to try and support them. So big shout out there for Laura and the role of the Rural Housing Enablers. What was quite unique about Roxwell as well was that this is one of the few sites where we've actually worked with the local diocese, and in this case the Chelmsford diocese. And many of you would have seen that the Church of England launched a report a month or so ago talking about the role that they felt the church had in trying to provide more affordable rural homes. And this is a great example of where the local diocese and church did get involved, and they made the land available. So without them, this wouldn't have been possible either. The total costs are broken down there, and you can see the amount of grant that we got, but also importantly the value that we got in from the discounted sales. This is a high value area, so 2 of them netted us, 675,000. So that made the whole thing viable. The other element of that costing I'd like to just highlight is that internal subsidy, 140,000. So from the surpluses that we make as a not-for-profit organisation, we reinvest those back in our purpose. We don't make enough of that perhaps as a sector. So this is an example of us reinvesting back that surplus in to make sure that the costs stacked up and we got these built. Finally, local design features, fabric first approach. Many of you will know what I mean by that. For those that don't, it's about making sure that you get the design and construction right from the start, so that they are energy efficient and cheap to run. And use air source heat pumps. And we're talking a bit more about that later, because like Gail, we are doing a retrofit program as well. If I move on to the next slide, please, Becca. So just to pick up on the discounted market sale units, I quite often get some questions about these when I mention them in presentations. So the way that we have worked them is that they are local needs as well. So to qualify for buying them, you need to have a local connection. That cascades out, obviously, over time to make sure that they can be sold on the market, therefore they attract a mortgage if that is needed. But we lock that local requirement in via a covenant. So it's not just in point of first sale, it's also when they're sold later on as well. And this is an extract from the advert we use to promote these homes. And I won't go through it, there's a lot in there, but you can see pretty much that the local credentials we're looking for are very comparable to what you would see in a Section 106 agreement attached to a rural exception site. Moving on to the next slide. And then the one after this as well, please, Becca. I wanted to touch on actually who lives in their homes, because quite often we will talk about the houses and the planning and the policy, and we don't actually talk about the people living in the properties. And you know, this whole Rural Housing Week is about sort of committed to rural communities. Well, you know, that commitment is around making sure that those communities are thriving because the people that live there contribute to them and add value to those communities. And that's certainly what we look to achieve through the affordable homes that we provide. So I actually looked back, and I was trying not to breach GDPR. I don't think I have, but I was trying to look back actually who moved in when these homes were completed a couple of years ago. And you'll see there that all local households, they're all local households who've grown up in the village or lived there for a decent amount of time. The local connections were sort of verified by the parish council. I think English Rural are very unique in the way that we engage the parish council with the permission of applicants, just to check out local connections. So we have that ongoing relationship with the Bamford Parish Council. And we did involve them in the process as well. 2 families, 1 couple and 2 single households. So I'm talking about the affordable units only here, of course. And then also I've listed out there, and this strikes a bit of a chord, I think. I've listed out there actually what the circumstances were for those households who we managed to help. And you'll see that there was one lady who was homeless. There was a family, so a couple and a young baby sharing a bedroom in a parent's home. There was somebody in private rent, and they'd had no functioning heating for 2 months, and this was over November and December. And there was an adult sharing with his sibling who was also another adult in the family home as well. So these 5 homes managed to resolve those circumstances for those individuals. And this is the first media clip, so you've heard it from me, but I want you just to hear perhaps from one of the residents who benefited from one of those homes as well. So this is Andrea's story. So Becca, if we can press play, please.
Loved the house, loved my job, and I was in heaven, and I thought I was getting on, and I thought I'd be there for life. That was it. I got made redundant. They evicted my horses off the yard, and they evicted me out the house. I was literally left homeless with just a little pile of furniture that I'd left, because that's all I had was my animals and a bit of furniture. Everything was out of control. I was totally heartbroken, just miserable, totally depressed, didn't know whether I was coming or going. It was a bit of a whirlwind, and it just didn't seem to end. Everything just kept going wrong. I stayed in my horse box for a few weeks in between. I had to sell it in the end because I needed the money to try and keep my head above water. In the village where I lived, they had a little building plot where they were building affordable housing for people that had ties to the village. And I bid on a property. And on the 2nd of January, the lady from the council rang me and said, you're at the top of the list, and that'll be yours. You've just got to go through the rural housing scrutiny, and if everything's okay, then they'll offer it to you. I just burst out crying. All my dreams come true in one, in a beautiful place, in a nice little village that I'd been in for the last 20 odd years. It was unbelievable. I just feel so lucky. I fully understand that small villages don't want lots of houses built in their village because it ends up spreading and you just end up with a big town. I fully understand that. But you think of all the people that are born in the village or work in the village or have lived here, when it comes time that they have to leave home or expand because they've got children, there is nothing affordable in the small villages or in the countryside. The little plot that was built here is absolutely beautiful. And if anything, it's made the lane where it's built more appealing because of the way it's been done. So this little plot here is 7, and everybody that lives in this plot here of the 7 houses of different sizes all come from this village. Where would they have gone? They would have had to leave here. I really do think, every little village has got a little bit of room somewhere to have a little plot. And if it's done as nice as it is here, it brings the standards up. It's lovely here.
Okay, there's Andrea's story, and just put that in context. Actually, we didn't know Andrea had done that. She did that for the local radio station, and then we were made aware. So it's completely independent, but she tells the story perhaps better than I can. Just moving on to the next case study. I've got here some stats that came from our 2020 resident satisfaction survey. And you can see when I was looking at these, generally speaking, people are fairly happy with the value for money, the quality of the house and the neighbourhood, etc. But the one thing that jumps out is satisfaction with heating and the energy efficiency of homes. And I suspect we're not alone in facing that level of satisfaction. And certainly it's something that we've been focusing on as part of our ongoing business strategy. So moving on to the next slide, I was just going to talk briefly about the retrofit programme that we've been undertaking. And you'll see at the top there, another pledge of the Rural Housing Alliance is to build to high environmental standards which help residents and communities reduce their carbon impact and be more sustainable and resilient. And we do that through our new build. I think we all do that through our new build properties, but actually it's looking back retrospectively and doing it for existing households as well. And similarly to Gail, you're thinking about the areas where we own and manage properties. It's challenging, this. And I picked out these are national stats. These aren't our own stats, these are national stats here. But around 49% of UK households are off the mains gas grid. So a lot actually don't benefit from mains gas. And 18% of rural households are fuel poor. And that's a higher degree for housing association tenants as well. Now, traditionally, when we were building back, 20 years ago, the way to solve that, as Gail has indicated, was to put some storage heating and convector heating into properties. And at the time, that probably worked. But now we need to try and do something about that, because what we find is that those storage heaters are expensive to run, and residents don't run them, or they'll just run one of them in the lounge. They'll shut the door and then they go to bed early, and then we have all kinds of condensation and mold issues because actually it's so expensive to run those to heat the whole house using those storage heaters. So we need to try and do something about that, and we have been doing something about that. So we just completed our second retrofit programme. So as it is at the moment, we've got 69% of our stock with an EPC of C, and we want to push that up. So our target is to have above 90% EPC or higher by 2026. That's our target, and we're fairly confident that we'll be able to achieve that as well. But this does mean sort of focusing on those older properties and changing those heating systems. So we're looking now at researching our third retrofit program of installing air source heat pumps It's not been without its challenges, and part of the challenge is actually in winning hearts and minds for new technology as well, so people understand it. It works differently to technology that households have been used to. So that's been a real sort of battle for us. And one of the ways we've gone around doing that is to bring vans on to the developments with these systems in, so people can sort of see them, talk to the engineers, and then making sure there's a lot of sort of hand-holding and also return visits as well to make sure that what's been set up is working effectively. And we've only been able to do this because of the level of grant that we've been receiving. So capital grant, so most recently through the Warm Home Funds, and also through the RHI in terms of revenue grant as well. So these are expensive to install when you're taking out the electric storage heating systems and putting wet systems in, and these big units in. It's not cheap to make the change, but it's been made possible through grant, and we're hopeful that actually that will continue to happen as well, and grant will be available for our future programs. Not without its challenges. Again, similar to Gail here, the supply chain has been a real issue for us in terms of getting the systems, particularly recently. And we've also found that the way grant has been allocated and the way that grant looks at deprivation doesn't really accommodate rural nuances very well. So the only way we've managed to secure it for the recent retrofit, the Warm Homes Fund, is to prove fuel poverty, and that's reliant on residents sharing their financial information with us and household bills with us, which not everybody's happy to do. So we've had to pepper pot these around. So we haven't been able to do a whole development. But a positive response overall. So, you'll see on the bottom there that we're reducing CO2 emissions by 71% for each household on average by putting these in. Also, we're reducing the household bills as well. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Thanks, Becca. Right, so the next slide, just a quick one here, quick case study. So another element of the pledge is to work closely with local communities and parish councils to find the best solutions to meet identified housing need. This is actually working with another housing association, Greyshot and District Housing Association, a little charity housing association in Greyshot, which is in Hampshire. Really ambitious board, no staff, but quite a bit of money they've accumulated over time, and the ability to borrow more money as well, and an ambition to try and spend that in meeting their purpose in delivering new homes. We didn't have the skills, so they invited English Rural in to assist them, and to look at some of the land that they had, to look at some of the poorly designed flats that they were making available, and ultimately what we supported them to do was to demolish 4 poorly designed flats and then to provide 14 new homes for local people. So they employed us to do that. So that was through their own finances and also raising some money from the Unity Trust Bank as well, and all designed to help local households as well. And it wouldn't have been possible without the trustees of that charity. Good quote there from Teresa Jemison, the chair. I think how pleased she is with that. From our own point of view, what that's also enabled us to do here is to use a bit of our spare capacity we've got in the development team at that time to generate some money that we can then reinvest in our own purpose. And a big chunk of the money that we've been making through that, actually we put into a hardship fund, which we then distributed during the pandemic to low-income households who were struggling to put some food on the table or electricity into the meter. Final case study I'm going to touch on, so moving on to the next slide, please, Becca, is around together with tenants and what we've been doing in terms of engaging tenants. And this links to the pledge, always listen and respond positively to our customers and the local community. I'm not going to sit here and say English Rural is perfect in doing this. And in fact, I think actually we've got a way to go still. We're an early adopter of Together with Tenants, and we've got a plan in place to try and improve the way that we engage residents and involve residents. We're not a big organisation, so we've nowhere to hide if things go wrong, I would say, and it's not unusual for me to get an email in my inbox telling me when they do. But nonetheless, we could do more to listen to residents, and that's certainly our intention and what we're trying to do through Together with Tenants. But one of the problems we have faced as a rural organisation is how do we do that when we've got dispersed small rural schemes? it's been really challenging because it's not that we can be on site or we've got scale on site to actually have anything that's meaningful at a very local level. So our approach to it has been to enhance and grow the digital engagement that we have. And we've had some success as well through doing that. And you'll see there, the fourth bullet point down, one of the things that we've done is created a sort of digital resident group, and that's very informal. That's to look at a policy, look at a process, to to ask for soundings on what we're thinking about doing. We've got about 5% of our residents now that engage with that actively and take part in that as well. We've also enhanced the role that our formal resident scrutiny group has within our sort of structure to make sure that their voice is heard at board level. So, for example, the minutes from that board are considered by, the minutes from that group are considered by our board, and we've got a resident that sits on the board and represents the views of residents. So we've enhanced that as well, and there's some way to go in improving that as well. Also, final point I'm going to pick up from this slide is the way that we now look to learn lessons from complaints. We don't have many complaints, but when we do, we take them seriously and want to make sure that we learn from them. And what our board felt was actually the Audit and Risk Committee had a formal role in actually listening to those complaints and understanding what lessons have been learned and what we were going to do in terms of acting on those lessons as well. So there's a formal role for the Audit and Risk Committee there. And finally, we've linked the resident voice to our internal value for money metrics that we are reporting on as well. So is that important to us that we've included it as our own bespoke VFM metric? I think that's probably me going over my time allocation, so I will probably end there. But I have got a short video, if you permit me, just to play at the end. It's about 2 minutes long, but hear it from our residents, what the homes are meant for them.
Living here has changed our lives by giving us affordable security and peace of mind in a lovely rural village.
It's changed my life because my son now has his own room and we now have a garden that we can just walk out into from the kitchen.
As a single mum, living in affordable housing has made it possible for me to work and live in a safe, lovely area, and gives me the peace of mind for a secure upbringing for my children.
Having an English rural home has given me a peace of mind, ultimately, with no more worry over extortionate rents. It's provided me and my daughter with a quality of life where we can afford more opportunities. It's also provided us with a sense of community. It's a very close-knit community, and we're very happy here. An increased sense of well-being, I suppose.
Being able to live in a rural, affordable home has allowed me to return to the village I grew up in, live close to family members, and also allowed me to help and contribute to my local community.
I want to thank English Rural Affordable Housing. I love my home, I love my village, and I love being near my family. Thank you for making it possible.
Thanks, everyone. A huge thank you to Ursula, Martin and Gail for their presentations. Right, we've got about 15 minutes for questions. Thank you to those of you who have already put your questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to try and rattle through them. There are some quite specific ones for each of our speakers, so I'll try and pick those off first. Gail, there was a question about the development you talked about where you had some open market sale. I think you did answer saying you split the site in two. Then someone's asked a follow-up. So just to clarify whether those open market sale cross-subsidised the other affordable homes on the site. I don't know if you just clarify how that worked. People are obviously quite interested in how that worked.
I suppose they did subsidise, but in a Not in an overt way, because we weren't getting the profit on the market sale, but the developer was building the homes to that same standard and used the same materials. So I suppose we got it by getting a really high quality build via the so it's sort of that indirect subsidy from one builder building on the whole site to a very high spec.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Martin, Nicola Kemp, who is a rural housing enabler in Somerset, is very interested in you saying about how the parish council verified the local connection on your site in Roxwell. And I think she was quite interested. She says it's a very intensive requirement to verify a 10-year connection, often includes checking the electoral roll, and there's delays if paperwork can't be found. And I think she's really interested if that's something parish councils can do, that could be really helpful. So can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, we do it with all of our developments. We do it on. So when we go in with the community, one of the anxieties that they have is, how do we genuinely know that people are going to live there, are going to meet the credentials that they need to, particularly when you're sort of using a rural exception site. So we do it on all of our developments. I mean, it does require the consent from the applicant. I've never known an applicant not consent, if I'm honest with you, and I think it would raise an alarm bell if they didn't. But they do have the option not to, because they've already been through some checks with the local authority as well. But all we do is we ask the applicant for information about how they meet that local connection criteria. So whatever it says in the section 106, how many years have you lived here? Where do you live? What's your family connection? And these communities are normally quite small communities, and I can tell you the parish clerk normally knows them all by name anyway, and comes back fairly rapidly to say, yeah, I know all these individuals. I mean, there are some occasions where they may come back and say, no, we don't know who that individual is. We can't verify that is accurate and correct. And I think then the onus is on us, just to double check that, just to say, actually, can you just give us a little more information on what that local connection is? Can you evidence it yourself? And it's important to do that, because if you get this wrong in terms of the allocation, that mud will stick for years. And the other local communities you're working with will suddenly say, they didn't give that to a local person. We don't trust them, we're not going to work with them. So actually the allocations process is so sensitive, it's really important to get it right. It does take a little bit longer. Our void times are a little bit longer than a normal housing association, a week or two. For me, that's money well spent if we get it right.
Thanks, Martin. And then a question from Community First, I think also referring to the scheme Martin talked about. How have you found the allocations process in regard to the market discount sales?
They weren't massively oversubscribed, so it wasn't as complicated as it could have been, but it could have been more complicated, because actually if they're massively oversubscribed, we would have to have some sort of means testing. It wasn't necessarily about who could pay the highest price. So it was fairly straightforward on this development, but I think we're mindful that if there was more than one applicant, then we would need to think about a bit of needs testing and how we'd apply a process around that. I don't think we've got that far yet, because we've not needed to.
And then so that's some more specific questions raised, and then some more general questions. So one from Kerry Booth: what one thing would you like the government to do to enable the development of more affordable rural homes? So Ursula, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
Thanks, Sarah. It's one of these ones. I took the question down, just thought it's a bit like, what do the Romans do for us? I put one thing down and then you start going down to 2 or 3. Interestingly, this might tie into one of the other questions that's coming up as well, and Martin alluded to it. And I think for me would be rural housing enablers, and we talk about the real valuable role that they do, and they really do help both parish councils, communities, but also housing associations that might not have the expertise to do that. It's not hand holding, but it's working with the parish, and some of the RHEs, from my experience, would help with identifying sites and things like this. So for me would be the funding of rural housing enablers, and for me that would be something that isn't just for now, it's got to have a longevity about it. The rural housing crisis, like an urban housing crisis, is going to take years. So for me it'd be some consistent funding that we can use across England, across the whole of England, to support rural housing enablers to help both the communities and maybe some of those associations that haven't got the expertise to do it. So I'll stick with that one, but I've got one about the planning bill as well later on.
We'll come to planning. I'm saving planning. Martin, Gail, anything else that you would want from the government? Ursula's made her plea for funding for rural housing enablers. Martin, come to you first.
Yes, I go first. I mean, thank you, Kerry, for the question. Just one thing, you know, I always want more than one thing. So if I was to choose one thing, I think it would be just to stop changing things, if I'm entirely honest. Sometimes it feels like you're trying to make plans on shifting sands, because suddenly one policy is fixed and then it's another's being reviewed and another's being reviewed, and just having some certainty. You can plan around certainty. You can't plan around uncertainty. So for me, it's just stop changing things. Let's get on with our job.
Thanks, Martin. And Gail, what would you like from the government?
I think a little bit of certainty. I'll bag Martin's certainty, and the policy I would have is a really a rigid 40% of houses built in rural areas to be for rent, affordable rent, and for that policy to stick, because as Martin says, everyone sits there and goes, oh well, it won't last, and therefore I won't sell you my land because I'll just sit on it and it'll be worth more when that policy goes away. And kind of tied in with that as well would be sticking to that 40% and not allowing viability to come back. The thing that haunts me, well, frustrates me, not haunts me, more than anything else.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions. I'm kind of going to roll into one to get your thoughts on. So someone has asked, would you see yourself as community-led housing? And then Richard Powley has asked, do the housing association, do you take the lead in the housing projects you've described, or were you working with identified needs identified by community groups such as community land trusts or parish councils? So a bit of kind of, I guess, the role of the community and how your role in this. And then there's also one of the first questions came in about the role that how engage larger housing associations. Like, I know none of you guys are huge housing associations. Like obviously the National Housing Federation is made up of a really diverse in terms of size and geography array of housing associations, but how we might engage larger housing associations in this, particularly when, as Gail, you were describing, it can take 12 years for a development to come to fruition and obviously cost more per unit than a similar home in an urban area. So there's a couple of questions in terms of like the role of housing associations, all this, that I just was going to roll up. Gail, can I come to you first this time?
Do we see ourselves as community based? Absolutely. We work with community trusts, with almshouses. We're just redeveloping some homes that were built in 1640 that are grade 1 listed. That brings some challenges, especially when you take down the plasterwork and you can actually see through the walls. That was a bit of a moment, but there you go. That's a case study, for a really interesting case study. We do work with parish councils because they're really important. They set the tone, and in fact we're part of a new rural commission in North Yorkshire, and one of the findings of that was that 5 affordable rent homes should be built in every parish council across North Yorkshire. So we should be championing that with the rural commission. And then we work with rural landowners, from people who've got one field. We've just developed 7 homes on the edge of a field where the lady is in her 70s and she wanted a legacy for her local community. So we probably wouldn't know about that kind of desire and want if we weren't embedded within local communities. So she came to us via the parish council and the local church to say, I want a legacy. I want something that adds value. How do we get large housing associations interested? I really struggle with that one, not because they haven't got the same values as ourselves, but they do something else for the housing crisis. We are not going to turn up and build 500 homes or redevelop a 1,200 unit flat complex in the centre of London. We haven't got the skills, we haven't got the knowledge. So I would actually say horses for courses and leave us to do rural development and rural work. And as I say, I wouldn't want to be in charge of doing some inner city redevelopment. It's not something I know about. So maybe that's me being a bit the bailout there. Who shall I pick on? I'll pick on Ursula this time.
Thanks, Gail.
Thanks, Gail. And just on that one, I was wondering how today I was going to seamlessly move into this one in terms of, I'm just going to talk about the larger housing associations and coverage. So one of the things that the Rural Housing Alliance have been talking about across England is, have we got hot spots and I guess cold spots of where rural housing is delivered? So at the moment, we're doing a rural mapping exercise with Homes England. So what I do know on this call is we've got some local authorities and potentially we've got some parish councils. So can I just say, can you just give your, well, whoever it might be in your authority, a bit of a nudge just to complete? We've sent out a survey monkey asking local authorities that are deemed rural or significantly rural, all about, have you got active housing associations? Have they got minimum size of schemes they'll do, etc., etc. That will really help us do that patchwork then of where have we got good coverage or not. But then that does lead into clearly the following question then is, so what are we going to do about the areas where we haven't got a lot? So I think we then want to work through, so where might we have housing associations active in that, whether they be small or large? And then the honest question about, and so why is it you are not actively working with those parishes or local authorities? And it possibly does come back, Gail's probably right, I'm trying to think about how I say this subtly, but I think it does come back to some bigger associations would go, do you know what, that takes a lot of resource to build 10 homes in a rural community and it's going to take me years. I might as well put my resources in a town where I'm going to get 60 very quickly. Therefore, it does though lead back to my point about rural housing enablers. I think if we made the process simpler, if we did quite a lot of that footwork with parishes and local authorities, even going to identifying sites, that might persuade more housing associations to engage, because a lot of the time that's taken to do that then will be taken from them. So that would be my plea on that one. And then just talking about how do we engage with parish councils, I'm sure Martin will say something. I've done everything from working with a local authority where we've contacted every rural parish and said, would you like us to come and talk to you with a rural housing enabler? And we've gone from there and had a priority of schemes. We've also gone from given the nod by a local authority that we've got a parish here that are really interested in rural housing, to sometimes, and it's more rarer, where you might have a site pop up. My key thing out of all of this is you need to make sure that the parish are really engaged, that they don't think that they're being pushed on, that we are pushing anything through with them. Because we always anyway go back to, so what's your housing need? Let's do a needs survey, let's understand what it is before we move it forward. So for me would be, however it comes, really make sure those parish councils are engaged from up front.
Thanks, Ursula. I'm gonna sorry Matt, I'm gonna leave it there because we've only got a couple of minutes. Like, I'm gonna sort of have us run over just a couple of minutes because I wanted to pick up the question about planning. So Jim has asked, how will the proposed changes to the planning rules impact on the development of rural affordable housing? So we know there's lots of really important issues kind of in the mix here, and I just wanted to get each of your thoughts on what was in the planning white paper and the potential reforms coming forward through the planning bill. Martin, should we go to you first?
Yeah, but I'm going to answer the last question as well. If I just really quickly, I'm going to, only because I'm burning to. Are we community led? 100% we are community led. We're welcomed into the community. We work with that community. We build houses for people in that community. That Roxburgh example, Hammered Home, who we're helping, we are absolutely 100% community led, and the most successful community led organisations, I would say, as well, in terms of reinvesting back in our purpose and delivering more homes. So recycling our money and building more homes with them. In terms of the planning white paper, I'm just going to pick up on one element of it because I'm sure others will pick up on others. I want to talk about just first homes exception sites and the impact that first homes generally will also have on delivery. So thinking about first homes exception sites, although there is a rural exemption from those, we will see it raise expectations amongst landowners in all rural communities. So actually securing rural exception sites is going to be more challenging, and the exemption that is there for them isn't strong enough. So not enough affordable rural homes will get built. And generally about sort of first homes in terms of delivering those as a commitment first, they will squeeze out genuinely affordable tenure. No doubt about it, they will. And I think there's a commitment to monitoring that, but those of us that work in the sector know what's going to happen. We can see it happening already. So first homes, not a great idea, I don't think.
Thanks, Martin. Gail?
I'm going to agree with Martin and then add in that zoning that says there is going to be areas that we are protect. I can just see everything grinding to a halt as people fight over whether their area is protect, and protect is more aimed at rural areas. So I can just see that longevity that I talked about as a lesson learned. We're going to need it with spades, I think.
Thanks, Gail. And then Ursula.
Yeah, just a real quick one, and I won't go into the detail because we know we're tight for time, but I suspect there's somebody on the call here that knows a lot more than me. And it's a really simple thing, is definition of rural. And we've got various different definitions that the government's using at the moment. The one they are using absolutely excludes about 70% of parishes that have got populations below 3,000. So get that definition right in terms of those thresholds where we start delivering affordable housing, and that could be a massive change and a simple one to fix.
Thanks, Ursula. I just want to say, so that's all we've got time for today. We've slightly run over, sorry about that. I wanted to say a huge thank you to our speakers today, to Ursula, to Gail and to Martin, and for all of you for joining us today. I hope you found this a useful session. Please do get in touch with me or any of our speakers or the Rural Housing Alliance more generally, if you'd like to know more about the pledge or the Parish Councillor's Guide. There's lots of activity during Rural Housing Week, so do look out for that and enjoy the rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.